She was just an air hostess, or at least that's what everyone saw. To the passengers, she was the friendly smile at the cabin door, the calm voice guiding them to their seats, the person reminding them to fasten their seatbelts and keep their tray tables upright. But inside, she carried a quiet, unspoken tension, the kind that only someone who spends thousands of feet above the earth every day could understand. That morning, she arrived at the airport before sunrise, the chill of early dawn brushing her face as she wheeled her bag across the empty tarmac. The world around her was still half asleep, yet she moved with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning the terminal for her team and the flight schedule. Today was supposed to be routine, a long international flight, but nothing unusual. Or so she thought. As she stepped onto the plane, she greeted the passengers with a warm smile, concealing the faint knot of apprehension forming in her stomach. She noticed a family struggling with their carry-ons, a business traveler typing furiously on a laptop, and an elderly man nervously adjusting his seatbelt. Each face told a story, and for a moment she imagined the lives behind those eyes. But duty called, and she moved along the aisle, checking the overhead bins and safety equipment. Takeoff began smoothly. The plane taxied along the runway and ascended into the pale morning sky. She demonstrated the safety procedures, her voice calm and practiced, guiding passengers through each step with a reassuring smile. Her eyes darted constantly, watching reactions, gauging anxiety, and silently promising herself that she would keep everyone safe. Yet beneath her composed exterior, an unusual unease simmered, a premonition she couldn't quite shake. For the first hour, the flight was uneventful. Drinks were served, passengers settled into movies and music, and the hum of the engines became a steady, soothing rhythm. But as the plane approached the vast expanse of the ocean, the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, rolling like an ominous tide. The air grew tense, and the plane trembled slightly with the shift of the wind. The knot in her stomach tightened. Passengers began to murmur nervously, glancing out the windows at the growing storm. She moved quickly among them, offering reassurance. "It's just some turbulence," she said with a calm smile, hoping to ease their fear. But deep down, she knew that turbulence was only the beginning. She checked her instruments, kept in contact with the cockpit, and followed every protocol drilled into her through years of training. Something about the storm felt different, more powerful, more unpredictable. Hours into the flight, the storm escalated. The plane rocked violently as gusts tore through the clouds. A few passengers screamed, clutching their armrests, while others prayed silently. She stayed at her post, moving swiftly and purposefully, instructing everyone to secure their seatbelts and remain calm. Panic threatened to creep in, but she suppressed it, channeling every ounce of focus into her role. Every passenger's life depended on her composure, and she refused to let fear dictate her actions. She knew the black box was recording every second, every word, every breath, every reaction. She understood the irony of it all. In those moments, when the storm raged around them and the plane bucked in midair, her life and the lives of the passengers were being captured in a small, unassuming box tucked away behind the cockpit. Those mechanical ears were the silent witnesses to the most critical moments of her career. Suddenly, a violent jolt shook the aircraft. Drinks spilled, luggage tumbled from the bins, and the plane lurched as if the storm itself were trying to tear it apart. Her heart raced, yet her expression remained calm. She moved among the passengers, steadying those who were terrified, whispering encouragement, and offering a presence they could cling to. Time seemed to stretch and collapse simultaneously. Every second became an eternity. The roar of the engines, the scream of the wind outside, and the panic inside the cabin blended into a chaotic symphony. She felt herself trembling, but she did not falter. She had prepared for this, studied every emergency procedure, and rehearsed countless worst-case scenarios. Now it was not a drill, it was real, and every choice mattered. She glanced at the black box again, almost unconsciously, aware that it would tell the story of this flight long after she was gone. Her training, her courage, and her fear were all being etched into memory, piece by piece. As the plane plunged and lifted with each violent gust, she whispered a promise to herself, "I will keep them safe." No matter what, and then it happened. A sudden, brutal jolt threw her against the aisle, and for a fleeting moment she lost balance. The storm had intensified, and the aircraft shuddered under the invisible weight of the wind. Yet she pushed through, forcing herself upright, clutching onto hope and professionalism in equal measure. The test of her courage, her skill, and her determination had begun. Every heartbeat, every decision, every movement from here on out would be recorded forever. The storm had become a living, breathing entity, thrashing the plane with a ferocity that no one could have anticipated. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of the passengers for split seconds before plunging the cabin back into darkness. Rain lashed against the windows, creating a deafening drumbeat that seemed to echo the rising panic inside. She gripped the seat of a nearby passenger, steadying herself while issuing instructions in her calmest voice, every word measured, precise, rehearsed. But inside, her heart was pounding. She had flown through turbulence before, storms before, even minor emergencies, but nothing like this. The aircraft shuddered violently, twisting and pitching like a wild stallion, and she felt the raw, terrifying power of nature pressing against the thin metal shell that separated them from the sky. Every instinct screamed at her to brace, to duck, to protect herself, but her professional duty overrode fear. Every passenger depended on her composure, and she could not allow herself to falter. A young child screamed, pressing his small face against the window, tears streaking down his cheeks. She knelt beside him, speaking softly. "It's okay, sweetie. We're safe. We're trained for this." The words sounded hollow even to her ears, but she repeated them anyway, clinging to the fragile thread of calm she projected. She saw a mother clutching her husband, whispering frantic prayers, and she placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Every action, every touch was an anchor in the chaos. The pilots' voices crackled over the intercom, strained but determined. "Brace for turbulence. Remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We're navigating through the storm." Their words were a lifeline, but the storm outside continued to roar, relentless and merciless. The plane pitched sharply to the left, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling in a slow cascade. Passengers scrambled to secure them, some fumbling, some crying. She moved quickly to assist, demonstrating, guiding, encouraging. Every second mattered. As the plane fought against the violent wind currents, she noticed the subtle signs of stress among the crew. Normally composed and professional, her colleagues' faces were pale, their movements slightly frantic. She caught the eye of the lead flight attendant, a silent exchange passing between them. "We are not losing anyone today." "We can't." That shared determination gave her a spark of renewed courage, and then, without warning, the plane lurched sharply downward, a terrifying drop that made the stomachs of everyone on board feel as though they had been yanked into the sky itself. Screams filled the cabin, a chaotic symphony of fear, pain, and disbelief. She was thrown forward, but her hands gripped the overhead rail, and she forced herself upright. Every move was precise, every word a lifeline. "Stay calm. Keep your seatbelt fastened. We'll get through this." Amid the chaos, she could hear the faint, mechanical hum of the black box recording every sound. The terror, the commands, the desperate prayers. The knowledge that every second was being documented created a strange clarity in her mind. This was not just about survival. This was about ensuring that even if the unthinkable happened, her actions, her courage, her professionalism would be remembered. The storm showed no mercy. Lightning struck close, a blinding flash that made her momentarily blind, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the cabin. The plane shuddered, twisting violently, and a shelf of luggage tumbled down the aisle, narrowly missing passengers. She dove to catch a falling bag, redirecting it safely away from someone's head, her heart racing. Every split-second decision mattered now more than ever. Through the chaos, she noticed an elderly man frozen with fear, unable to secure his seatbelt. She moved quickly, guiding him, locking the belt around him with practiced efficiency, whispering reassurances. "You're safe. We're here with you. Breathe." She repeated it to herself as much as to him, grounding her own rising panic with each act of help. Hours, or perhaps only minutes, Time had become meaningless in the storm's grasp, passed like an eternity. The plane trembled with every gust, and each shadowed corner of the cabin seemed to conceal potential disaster. She moved tirelessly, assisting, encouraging, comforting, and guiding. Her voice never wavered, though inside she felt exhaustion creeping over her like a cold, heavy cloak. Then came the worst. The plane caught a sudden, violent downdraft, and everything went weightless for a moment. The seats, the luggage, the passengers, even her. The entire cabin became a chaotic storm of flying objects, terrified screams and metallic clatter. She was knocked to the floor, rolling to catch a screaming child as the plane lurched again. Pain shot through her side from a collision with a seat, but she ignored it, focusing solely on keeping others safe. Through the noise, she heard a faint voice over the intercom. The pilot's strained tone. "Brace yourselves! Emergency descent initiated!" The words struck like a hammer, yet somehow reinforced the urgency and the gravity of the situation. There was no time for fear. Every action had to be precise. Every second could save a life. Her body ached. Her hands were raw from gripping rails and catching falling objects. But she continued. She moved from one passenger to the next, securing straps, calming panic, keeping everyone as safe as possible in a situation that felt completely uncontrollable. And all the while, the black box recorded it. Her voice, her instructions, the terrified cries, the thunder outside, capturing the final hours of calm amidst chaos. Even in the eye of this storm, a strange focus came over her. She knew the outcome was uncertain, but she refused to let despair dominate. Each passenger she helped was a small victory. Each word of reassurance was a lifeline, and deep down, despite exhaustion, fear, and the terror pressing against the windows of the cabin, she refused to give in, because she was more than an air hostess. In this storm, she was the guardian, the anchor, the calm in a world gone mad, and she would not falter, not now, not ever. By now, the cabin was a whirlwind of fear, chaos, and desperate attempts to maintain control. The storm outside was relentless, its violent winds and howling rain battering the plane with the force of an unforgiving ocean. Inside, the passengers clung to their seats, hands white-knuckled on armrests, eyes wide with terror. And through it all, she moved tirelessly, the calm in the eye of this storm, even as the world around her seemed to teeter on the brink of disaster. The violent turbulence had left its marks. Spilled drinks, bruised passengers, scattered luggage, and minor injuries. Yet she continued, checking everyone, giving instructions, and keeping spirits up as best as she could. She had become a lifeline, a beacon of professionalism and courage. And all the while, the black box quietly recorded her every word, every movement, every act of bravery that might one day tell the story of that day. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently to the side, throwing her against the aisle with enough force to knock her breath away. A metallic screech echoed as an overhead compartment burst open, sending a cascade of bags and personal items tumbling to the floor. Instinctively, she dove to catch a young woman and her toddler, shielding them as luggage crashed around them like missiles. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she ignored it. Every second counted. Every life mattered. The pilots' voices came over the intercom again, strained, barely audible over the roar of the engines and the storm. "We're losing altitude. Brace for impact!" Those words struck terror into every heart on board, but they also sharpened her focus. This was no longer just a storm. This was a fight for survival. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself upright, moving from one passenger to the next, securing seatbelts, calming cries, whispering reassurances, each word a thread holding fragile hope together. A man in his 60s had fainted, his head hitting the tray table with a sickening thud. She rushed to him, checking for consciousness, gently tilting his head back and speaking in a calm, steady voice. "You're going to be okay. Stay with me. Focus on my voice." His eyes fluttered open, terrified but alive. She smiled faintly at him, though her heart pounded in her chest. Each small success felt monumental amidst the chaos. Time seemed to distort. Moments stretched like hours, and hours condensed into seconds. The plane pitched, dived, and twisted in ways that defied comprehension, yet she navigated the narrow aisles with precision, her hands steady despite bruises, cuts, and exhaustion. She became a lifeline, a human anchor in a world gone mad. Passengers looked to her for reassurance, and she could not falter. Not now, not ever. And then, it happened. A sudden, deafening crack tore through the sky as lightning struck dangerously close. The cabin lights flickered and went out, plunging the interior into darkness. Screams erupted, amplified by the panic in the pitch-black cabin. She fumbled for the emergency flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating terrified faces and trembling hands. One by one, she guided passengers toward safety, her voice firm, calm, commanding. "Hold on! Stay in your seats! Breathe with me!" A sharp jolt threw her to the floor once again, and she collided with a seat, knocking the wind out of her. Pain radiated through her ribs, and blood trickled from a small cut on her forehead. But there was no time to pause. She scrambled upright, helping a young woman whose arm was trapped under a fallen bag. She freed her, guided her back to her seat, and quickly checked her injuries. "You're okay," she whispered, though her own body screamed in protest. Through it all, she could hear the faint, unrelenting hum of the black box recording every sound. Every scream, every instruction, every prayer whispered or shouted, every crash and every tremor was being etched into memory. This tiny, mechanical witness would hold the story of her courage, her sacrifice, her unwavering commitment to saving lives. Even if she didn't survive, it would tell the world the truth. She had been more than an air hostess. She had been a guardian. The plane was losing altitude fast. The turbulence had become near uncontrollable, and every jolt brought a fresh wave of panic. But she refused to give in. Her mind worked rapidly, calculating the fastest ways to secure the passengers, finding every opportunity to mitigate the danger. She moved like a conductor of chaos, orchestrating safety in a symphony of fear and desperation. Suddenly, another violent gust pitched the plane sharply, and the oxygen masks fell again, this time causing more panic than relief. Some passengers struggled to pull them over their faces, others cried in confusion. She moved from seat to seat, demonstrating, assisting, and reassuring. "Pull it down firmly. Breathe slowly. You're safe. We're together." She repeated the words over and over, a mantra she clung to as fiercely as she clung to life itself. Hours, or perhaps minutes, time had become meaningless, passed. Every muscle in her body screamed, every nerve was on fire with exhaustion and adrenaline. But she refused to succumb to fatigue. She refused to succumb to fear, because in that small, steel tube flying through the wrath of nature, she was the difference between life and death for everyone aboard. And she would not, could not, fail. As the storm continued its assault, she realized that the outcome of this flight hung by the finest of threads. Every decision she had made, every action she had taken, had led to this fragile balance between survival and catastrophe. And even if she did not make it through, the black box would tell the world what she had done, how she had risen to the challenge, how she had refused to let panic rule, how she had been more than just an air hostess. Because today, in the storm, she had become something else entirely. A hero, a protector, a lifeline. The storm had begun to wane, but its aftermath was still palpable. The cabin smelled of burnt coffee, spilled drinks, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Outside, the clouds were thinning, revealing streaks of sunlight that pierced the horizon. Inside, however, the tension had not yet lifted. Every passenger was still trembling, every hand still clutched tightly to something, anything, that offered even a shred of comfort. She stood in the aisle, surveying the cabin, her body aching from hours of relentless chaos. Cuts and bruises marked her skin, and her uniform was torn in several places, but her eyes were still sharp, scanning for anyone who needed help. The storm had tested them all, pushing them to the edge of survival. And though the plane had survived, so had she, but not unscathed. The pilots' voices came over the intercom again, this time steadier, calmer, carrying a sense of relief. "We are stabilizing. We'll be preparing for an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Everyone, please remain calm." Her heart surged with a mix of exhaustion and relief. The danger was not over, but the worst had passed. Every passenger she had protected, every action she had taken, had mattered. As she moved down the aisle, assisting passengers to their feet and checking for injuries, she noticed the expressions on their faces: gratitude, disbelief, relief. Some cried silently, holding on to loved ones, while others whispered words of thanks to her. She offered smiles and nods, though her own exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Each moment was a testament to the hours she had spent risking everything to keep them safe. Then came the call that she had known might come. One of the flight attendants, pale and shaken, approached her quietly. The black box? It recorded everything. It captured your voice, your instructions, everything you did to save everyone. Her hands shook slightly as she realized the magnitude of it. Every word she had spoken, every action she had taken in the midst of chaos, had been preserved. It was a record of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary professionalism. As the plane finally descended toward the airport, the turbulence easing with every passing minute, she felt a strange mix of relief and lingering fear. Her body was exhausted, every muscle trembling, but her mind remained alert. She helped the passengers buckle into their emergency positions for landing, guiding them with calm authority. Even in the final moments, she knew that her role had not ended. Survival required every ounce of focus she could muster. The landing was rough, a jolt and a bounce that made every passenger hold their breath. The wheels screeched against the runway, the engines groaning as the plane slowed. But then, gradually, the aircraft came to a full stop. Silence followed, a silence heavier than any storm, filled with relief and disbelief. The passengers erupted into quiet applause, tears streaming down their faces. Some embraced each other, others simply sat, shaken but alive. She moved down the aisle one last time, checking every passenger, ensuring that everyone was unharmed. Her uniform was stained, her hair disheveled, but her spirit remained unbroken. The storm had tested her in every possible way, but she had endured, just as she had promised herself she would. And now the realization settled in. She had not only survived, she had saved lives. In the quiet aftermath, she finally allowed herself to breathe. She sat down in the crew seat, head resting against the cabin wall, eyes closed. The adrenaline that had carried her through hours of chaos was fading, leaving behind exhaustion, but also a profound sense of fulfillment. She had been more than an air hostess that day. She had been a protector, a lifeline, a guardian for every soul aboard. Later, as authorities and medical personnel boarded the plane, she gave her report calmly, detailing every action, every instruction, every decision. But her mind drifted back to the black box, tucked away near the cockpit, recording her every word during the storm. It would tell the world the truth of what had happened, the fear, the chaos, and above all, her courage in the face of unimaginable danger. She thought of the passengers she had helped, the young child, the elderly man, the terrified mother, the fainted man, all lives that had depended on her focus, her skill, and her bravery. And she realized with quiet awe that she had not been alone. Each member of the crew, each pilot, had played a part. But the responsibility she had carried, the lives she had held in her hands, was uniquely hers. Later, when the official report would be released, the recordings from the black box would reveal her final words during the storm. Calm, precise, unwavering. Words that had guided passengers through terror, that had reassured them, that had saved lives. And though she would never seek recognition, those words would immortalize her courage. They would tell a story of a woman who, in the face of overwhelming odds, refused to give in to fear. As the passengers disembarked, many approached her, tears in their eyes, hands outstretched. "Thank you," they whispered, their voices choked with emotion. She smiled, nodded, and offered words of comfort, though the gratitude was almost overwhelming. In that moment, she felt the weight of what had been accomplished, the lives saved, and the extraordinary circumstances she had endured. She walked to the back of the plane one last time, pausing to glance at the seats, the aisles, the aftermath of the storm. And as she did, she knew that her life had changed forever. She had been tested in ways she had never imagined. She had faced fear, chaos, and death itself. And through it all, She had emerged not just as an air hostess, but as a hero. Because sometimes, ordinary people are called to extraordinary acts. And in the black box, her story, her courage, and her final words would live on. Forever, a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of calm in the face of terror, and the heroism of a woman who refused to let fear define her.